back to the Director's Garage. I'm not sure what I did there. I am your host and resident idiot, Michael, and today I've got a bunch of topics to roll through. I'm going to be talking some Grammys, as you would know if you caught my Director's Garage live happy hour hangout, the 4-H Club. We try to do that every Wednesdays on Hump Day. There's your fourth H. I was in Vegas last weekend for that spectacle of a Grammys show, and we're going to talk about that and the 2 headphones I brought along for that trip. Today I'm going to give you a mini sound check of both the 7Hz Eternal, a headphone that I unboxed and demoed a few weeks back here on the Director's Garage, and the Meze Empyrean Elite, Meze's flagship that dropped last fall. I'm also going to share my experience I had down at the Audeze factory. I went down there to surrender my carbon for an upgrade, and I got to check out a few headphones I hadn't before heard, along with a tour of their assembly line. So let's start today off with a little Grammys. Check out the hat with the cardboard. I didn't have this kind of luck at the table.
Bummer.
Okay. What happened at the Grammys was the polar opposite of what happened at the award show the week before. The whole thing felt current and relevant. The performances were edgy with a little bit of nostalgia thrown in. The whole thing felt to me like what an award show should represent, a celebration of the industry, in this case, the music industry. Where the Oscars seemed steeped in the past, disregarding the train wreck that came on later in the show, the Grammys were a pure spectacle and a joy to watch. Now, behind the scenes, this was a different Grammys than in the past. For nearly 30 years or so, the Grammys were produced by a guy named Ken Ehrlich. Now, I like Ken, and I enjoyed the way he put that show together, but in the more recent years, the show kind of became this exercise in trying to put together the acts that sort of least belong together to see if some new performance or style would emerge. And this is a grand approach when it works, but too often the performances became a compromise of not allowing the artists to do what they did best because they had to somehow mesh with the other artists they were paired with. This year's show focused on pairing the strengths of each performer. The perfect example is the Lenny Kravitz pairing with H.E.R. You got to see an amazing performer in H.E.R. show off her many skills, the drumming and the guitars, and then she jammed out with a guy who can seriously play guitar. And she was able to keep up. It wound up raising both artists in one performance, and it was a sight to see. Now, being there, I got a totally different perspective, but I gotta confess that my feet are still killing me. I wore those BFG boots, the really good-looking Billy Gibbons boots that I showed you a couple of episodes ago. Well, they're not broken in yet, and my feet took a pounding. I'm still counting the blisters. Like, part of my foot is still numb from that experience. But if you were there, you would have seen me running around getting video backstage and shooting these interviews, trying to get people. And behind the scenes, what you see are all these production elements being rushed onto the stage and pulled off the stage as they set for the next performance. It's this organized chaos with celebrities and performers getting ushered in every direction at once. But it's the chance meetings that always impress me. And Sunday, I was getting to watch what happened when Lady Gaga entered a room. It was like the oxygen suddenly got sucked out all at once, and the newer artists and even a few established artists flocked to her. Either for advice or approval, I can't tell which, sometimes both, really, I guess. It was neat to see that appreciation, often mutual. She praised them at the same time, but I got to see it all play out. Now, I also ran into blues legend Bonnie Raitt, and when I was getting my start in TV, my first real professional job after college was for a PBS station in Chicago, WTTW. Now, the station provided a lot of programming for the national audience, including a concert series called Soundstage. It was also branded Center Stage for a few years. And one of the episodes I worked on was a concert featuring Bruce Hornsby. Now, Bruce's album at the time was called Harbor Lights, and one of the songs in that album was Rainbow's Cadillac. It featured Bonnie on vocals, and she came to the studio to perform on that show. It's one of my very favorites in the series. Now, my Bruce Hornsby story is when we broke for lunch during rehearsals, Bruce joined the crew in the catering line. I couldn't believe it. Now, most headliners get their lunch catered. Whatever they want to eat, the show will pick it up. They'll go out and get it and bring it to them, and usually they'll eat in their dressing room or in their trailer. Bruce went through the catering line and right next to me, and he ate with the crew. It was like we're doing this show and I happened to play piano. It was remarkable stuff. Well, on Sunday, I got to tell that story to Bonnie, and she remembered being on that show. She definitely didn't remember me. She posed with me, though, for this picture. And for the record, back then, I was basically a PA. I did whatever the show needed me to do. So there's a couple of Grammy stories for you. Now, the show was in Vegas, and I brought 2 headphones with me. I brought a pair of IEMs for the plane and a headphone for my hours of prep in the room. Now, the headphone I brought was the Meze Elite, and the IEM right here, this one, the 7 Hertz Eternal. And I'm going to talk about each of these on today's show. So first up is the Eternal. Now this is an IEM that screams for attention. You're going to get some odd looks if you're wearing these on a plane. Don't ask me how I know. They're copper, they're glassy, and they draw attention. Now, when it comes to sound, I get major Moondrop vibes from the Eternal, but it's got an even more powerful bass presence, and that's something you might expect when you're presented with a 14.5mm liquid crystal polymer diaphragm. It's the largest of any dynamic in an IEM. Remarkably, all that bass isn't neutering the treble. I said it, neutering. Get over it. But it's true. The treble has good presence. What this set lacks is detail. It's just not as resolving as its timeless stepbrother, stepsister, step whatever. Still, on AC/DC's Shoot to Thrill, when the bass drums and the toms take over in the breakdown section, there is a nice snap on the top of the skins and the cymbals crash with decent sparkle. But it's just not the spectacle that is the Timeless. The transience in the space between the instruments is a terrific surprise on the Timeless. It's just not there on the Eternal. In fact, that's the whole problem with the Eternal. It's just not the Timeless. The Timeless is a little more reference maybe on the bottom end, but it still has excellent bass extension when they're seated properly. The Timeless brings everything you'd want and expect in a headphone that costs like 5 times as much. The Eternal kind of rounds everything off. It's kind of like, well, close enough. So in what world would you ever choose the Eternal over the Timeless? Well, believe it or not, I'm going to make a few cases for you right now. The Timeless requires a perfect seal, and they're fidgety when it comes to placement. I'm unable to get there with anything other than foam tips, and a lot of people don't like the feel of foam clogging up their ears. Now, the other reason is power. To get this bass thumping, you gotta bring your A-game source, something like the N8 in high power with solid state mode activated. The Eternal gives you all that bass under any power setting, any player at any time. It's the benefit of being a dynamic driver. The Timeless, though, is a much better value at about the same price. The Eternal is still a great sounding set, and they complement the Timeless for those times when you don't have your best player with you, or you simply want to get your bass on, and the Eternal does rock out. They love high energy tracks, maybe less suited to acoustic and jazz and classical, that kind of stuff, the refined music. This leans more into commercial sounding music. The Timeless is more looking for music that can show off an amazing soundstage or terrific imaging, well recorded music that has good dynamic range. But I haven't really found a genre that sounds bad on the Timeless. It's more about revealing poorly recorded music than anything. Now, at the MGM Grand, which is not my favorite Vegas resort, by the way, I spent the night prepping for the Grammys doing cue cards. These are basically pages of text on my iPad that I can use to hold up and cue talent. It takes a full night to prep for around 200 bands and celebrities, and to help me through, I had the Meze Elite, or Meze Empyrean Elite. Pick your poison. But to drive them, I brought this guy. This is my SP1000 and its daughter amp married into it. Because it's going to be hours of prep, comfort is really important, and the Elite delivers there, no question. These things are like a warm hug. And who doesn't like a warm hug, you know? The sound is pretty warm too, and that's what kept coming across as I rolled through tracks by Tedeschi Trucks and the Black Crowes. I gotta do a feature on the Black Crowes one day. I will. I stayed pretty much in the rock lane that night because driving music kind of keeps me focused. Now, sometimes I think the sound comes across as too saturated with warmth on the Elite. I would never pair these with a tube, and not that a tube was an option anyway, I was on the road. But there's excellent thumping bass that extends deep into the sub, and the bass really is the star of the show on the Elite. Still, there's excellent clarity on the top end, and there should be, considering its whopping $4,000 price tag. But hey, we're in Vegas, baby, home of the ballers, so a baller headphone is kind of what it's all about, right? So stupid. Okay. Well, I brought the Elite primarily for comfort, but also because they're so easy to drive, and the Elite doesn't require a lot of power to get that bass to activate. I was on like the low power setting in this SP1000, and there's bass on this thing for days. They produce an excellent soundstage too. This was a pretty good night of music listening, and the Meze delivers a full range immersive experience. I think they were an excellent choice for this trip. Finally today, I got to check out the Audeze factory recently on a trip I made down to the South Coast. They needed to collect my carbon, or Kerbin, to do an upgrade that will tone down their Stax farts. Now, don't worry, I did that joke in the last episode. We won't revisit it today. But they let me check out a few headphones that I now want to get in here at the director's garage. I didn't get any images from that trip, I'm sorry guys, but this one was all about the experience, and I'll share with you my imageless impressions. So we started by talking carbon, and they showed me several samples of their diaphragm, which is basically clear. It's like I'm holding it up right now. You really can't see anything, but it's a diaphragm that's embedded with this carbon nanotube technology. It's way too small for the eye to pick up, but they chose carbon as the element because it doesn't show up on MRI machines. But carbon also has a conductive quality that's required for electrostatic speakers. Now, I learned that the carbon wasn't really a slam dunk as far as a consumer product. They developed this tech specifically for the medical headphone and had no plans of turning it into something you or I could really purchase. It was only after the medical product was finished that they began to toy around with the idea of doing a consumer line with the tech. Then it was on to auditions, and the first thing I tried was the XC, which is their closed-back flagship. The engineers there told me that the isolation is so good with this headphone, they're getting orders from guys who are running soundboards at concerts. Now think about how loud a concert is and what kind of isolation you must need to pull a mix out of it. Now, I was impressed putting them on. They really do reject a lot of the room sound, especially for a passive headphone. I couldn't hear the guys talking in the room when I had them on, and I was kind of worried they were talking about me every time I closed them up. But it was worth the risk, and the clarity was really the first thing that struck me on the XC. These things have great speed. It's a full range experience all throughout the frequency range. The detail is exceptional. I think that at $1,200, this thing's a bargain. I don't know that there's much out there that can compete in a closeback at that price point, but they are a little bit on the heavy side, but that didn't really bother me at all. I could see myself mixing on these for sure. I did have a little bit of concern that they seem to have a little bit of lift in the upper mids, lower treble area, a little bit of emphasis there, but I really need more time with them to sort them out properly. Now, the other headphone that I auditioned were the LCD-4Z. Now, I've heard the LCD-4 in the past. This is quite a heavy headphone, quite a heavy package. This LCD-4 has been reimagined with less weight, and they're easier to drive without sacrificing that magnificent full-bodied bass response. I was quite taken with the 4, and they're now on my short list. I just want to get a pair in here. I just wish they were a little more consumer-friendly when it came to price. They pack nearly as much detail as the LCD-5, but with that bass emphasis, and they were a lot of fun. It's a headphone I could see myself spending a lot of time with down the road. I was prepared to buy some stuff on site, but they told me all of their inventory is spoken for. The nerve!
Please!
They don't keep products on the shelves to sell right there. Everything has been sold before it's manufactured. So your director walked away empty-handed and with an empty credit card too, thankfully. And then finally, we headed off into the back room, the factory floor, where the magic really happens. They showed me a demo of their phaser magnet tech. Now, basically, they've designed a magnet that has more attraction on one side of it than the other. In other words, you could take a piece of steel and stick it on this side. It's really hard to pull off. And then you put the same steel on the other side, and it like comes off with not a problem. So this is really the core of their technology for the current lineup from Audeze, other than the carbon, of course. Now, the first thing that wows you when you go into the back room is that there are racks of headphones everywhere. It's like Audeze audiophile heaven. Now, some are waiting for another step in the assembly process, and others are just sitting there burning in. They do 24 hours of burn-in, the engineers say, before they send their headphones out and package them. But the engineers also say that no burn-in is required or even advised for Audeze headphones. There isn't any gain to be had by burning in a planar magnetic or an E-stat. It's an opinion that I happen to share, so I told you so. Kidding. Kinda. Beyond that, there were two other areas that really kind of impressed me. There's a zero dust area surrounded by plexiglass walls where the pure air, which is dust-free, is pumped in from the ceiling and allowed to escape from the bottom so that no dust can settle in the assembly process of the drivers. Dust is an enemy of planar magnetics. That was really cool to see, though no one was really working in the room at the time. It was empty. Now, the other thing that was really kind of cool was these laser cutting machines they use for their planar magnetic diaphragms. Kind of like a CNC-sized machine, but way cooler with lasers in it. The diaphragms are this nano-thin sheet of metal, and they kind of look like those blankets that they give runners at the end of marathons to keep their heat in them, but way, way thinner. Most headphone companies use chemicals to etch the shape of their driver membranes. Audeze uses a computer-controlled laser, which does two things. It gives them perfect repeatability, and it produces a much more precise edge or a smoother cut on their drivers. They gave me this plexiglass driver to look at. It was kind of like floating in plexiglass, and it looks kind of like a solid sheet of thin aluminum until you hold it up to the light and you see all these grooves that have been cut into it. Very cool stuff. Now, we also talked about tension and diaphragm thickness. Audeze, it turns out, is on the same chase as the rest of the planar magnetic manufacturers. They're in pursuit of the ever thinner diaphragm. Less mass, more speed. The less material they have to push and pull with the magnets, the easier it is to move that material, resulting in a much more detailed sound. All of this tech, though, costs money, and while the parts for your headphone may only cost a few $1,000s, that first headphone can cost millions to make. That's why these headphones cost so much. Now, I was only down there for about 90 minutes or so, but the impression I left there with was this. Audeze seems to be focusing on bringing a reference experience to their flagships. Now, I asked them point blank if they'd be doing a headphone as a successor to the LCD-4, a headphone that would bring that bass emphasis without sacrificing the speed of the LCD-5, and they told me the 5 was the successor to the 4. There aren't any plans for a bassier headphone. Now, given the more reference leanings of the XC, my conclusion is that the direction for Audeze is to move away from the more fun tunings and focus the company's future in the reference lane. Now, I appreciate that approach as someone who mixes and records, but I do kind of wish that they'd think about giving us bass heads a little more love down the line. I like both approaches, and I think the tent here is large. They'd move a lot of product in each lane. So I hope you found today's garbage salad episode interesting. If you did, I'm going to ask you to consider subscribing to the Director's Garage, because it's your subscriptions that keep this train moving down the line. I can get more visits like these in the future if y'all take a minute and click that button. Now, the links are in the description below to the 7Hz Eternal and the Meze Elite. Both I bought from Audio 46, and if you use the coupon code Director's Garage, all one word, you can save an extra 5% on most of the items they stock. Pretty good deal. So give today's episode a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, or you can do the other thing if you'd rather see me thrown to a pack of starved mountain lions. I can't say I blame you either way, but I will see you before you know it.